As we all begin to settle in, again, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Istanbul Center's Dialogue and Friendship Dinner 2008. I'm Charles Edwards, and I'm with 90.1 FM WABE, your home for the classics and NPR News. And whenever I'm in front of a microphone, I start to think about a news report that I read, or the weather, or the traffic. So throughout the night, if I say sunny skies tomorrow, or if I say president-elect, or things of that nature, you know where it's coming from. But all jokes aside, on behalf of 90.1 WABE, we are honored to be here for tonight's very special event. And just briefly, 90.1 WABE is just one part of what we call Public Broadcasting Atlanta. It also includes PBA 30, which is our TV companion, providing a lot of great children's programming as well as thought-provoking documentaries and talk programs, and of course, the radio station. It also includes Atlanta Forum Network, which is here tonight taping the wonderful event here at the West End Hotel. But tonight is really a special occasion for the Istanbul Center. The organization's mission is really to help move a world in a peaceful direction that will benefit all of our lives. A world where nonviolence, respect, understanding, friendship, cooperation, and love will all prevail over violence, hatred, ignorance, and separation. The Istanbul Centers, you can definitely clap for that. And when you look further at what the Istanbul Center tries to do, the mission is to help solve problems facing all of us today. And that's education issues or cultural challenges, environmental problems, along with a host of other interests. The center seeks to accomplish this by showcasing the Turkish experience of what's known as the art of living together. And when we say that, we're talking about respect, we're talking about acceptance, we're talking about dialogue, love, richness of faith, and culture over centuries of time. Education is also a major focus of the center. The goal is to educate all about Turkish culture, learn the language and the history and all aspects, because that's how we bridge gaps. And we can learn that right here in the Southeast about the Turkish culture. The center also wants to spark discussion because, again, that is truly the way that we bridge gaps and foster togetherness and foster partnership.
Thank you very much. I must confess my regret that I have not been to Turkey, and I hope you will do something to correct that omission on my part. Yes, you can. There's an idea that we in all religions have, which is also expressed by the economist Adam Smith, and that is the notion of the hand of God working in our history. And I would contend that we are now living witnesses to the hand of God moving in mysterious ways to create an alliance of civilizations where there once was perceived a conflict of civilizations. It's been happening a long time. I began to be aware of this when, in 1948, Dr. Benjamin Mays, the president of Morehouse College, went to India and learned of Mahatma Gandhi. And he came back to Morehouse, and there a young man who was about to graduate, Martin Luther King Jr., heard of Mahatma Gandhi and the alliance of American Christianity and Indian Hinduism brought a concept of nonviolent social change that we had not thought of before. It was the evolution of that process that I think continued to lead us in many ways throughout history. My one association and awareness of Turkish influence in America was a gentleman by the name of Ahmet Ertegun. And for those of you who don't know, it was Ahmet Ertegun who introduced to the world Otis Redding, sitting by the dock of the bay, Ray Charles, and Aretha Franklin. And essentially, it was a man of Turkish heritage that brought about the cultural revolution that we now call rock and roll. Now, I would contend that rock and roll was also the hand of God, though many people thought it was the work of the devil. But one of the things that happened as a result of the rhythm and blues and the rock and roll of our Southland was that young white people realized that when they heard this music, they couldn't keep still either. They patted their feet. They wanted to move with the rhythm. And the rhythms integrated America long before the churches or the Congress or even the universities. It was a cultural phenomenon that swept across this nation and indeed swept across the world. And very few people understood it. I must plead guilty to the fact that I did not understand the present revolution. I knew that it changed the world when the printing press was created. And I know that men and women who started reading the scriptures in their own language created such a cultural explosion that it overflowed the banks of Europe and created the United States of America. But I did not understand what the internet was doing in the world today. And so, while all of you understood, particularly Dr. Durley, that God was working through Barack Hussein Obama, I had too many of the scars of Egypt, too many of the persecutions of my segregationist past, to believe that even the power of God could change America. But I didn't understand the internet. And I didn't understand that the internet would have an impact on America as profound and maybe more so than the printing press had on Europe. And so I was totally unprepared. I thought it was a Republican trick. I couldn't understand, and maybe it was. I couldn't understand why a group of Jews, and the first people I knew who were supportive of Barack Obama in Chicago happened to be Jewish. They were very progressive Jews, but I couldn't even imagine a person of progressive Jewish persuasion supporting a president of the United States of America with an Islamic name. And yet that was exactly what I was told they had in mind. That they were so concerned about the alienation of America from the rest of the world, that they thought it would take something very, very dramatic to restore America's history and heritage of values and vision and idealism. And they believed when I didn't believe. Of course, I would say they didn't know Southwest Georgia like I did. And they didn't know the backwoods of Louisiana like I did. But even though the backwoods of Louisiana and the backwoods of Southwest Georgia remain not completely converted, there is a remarkable difference. There's a remarkable difference between the long lines of people standing for advance voting and the time that I led a voter registration drive in South Georgia and was welcomed by about 200 Ku Klux Klansmen. We have come so far, so fast, that even those of us who think of ourselves as leaders in the race can't keep up. It's true what Gandhi said. There go my people. I must catch them, for I am their leader. And that's exactly the way I feel. And so, though I had read The Audacity of Hope and marveled at his eloquence and his intellect, I said, not in America in 2008. But then after November 4th, which is a far more significant day, and put behind us September 11th. After November 4th, I went back and I had Dreams from My Father on my desk and had not read it. But I had also tried to get young and had downloaded it on my iPod. And I decided not to read, but to listen. And to my amazement, he reads this biography himself. And it reminds me so much of the autobiography of Martin Luther King, which you can also download from iTunes, where he recites the speeches himself. And so you hear the writings of Martin getting up to the point where, as a 26-year-old, at 7:30 at night, he's elected to the leadership of the Montgomery Improvement Association. And at 8 o'clock at night, he's got to make a speech defining a movement that he had just been called to lead. And you hear in that first speech of Martin Luther King in his own voice, which was only recorded because Coretta had just had a baby, and she made sure that it was recorded so she could hear it. And so we hear a 26-year-old with a half-hour notice defining the movement of our time. It's similar in listening to Barack Obama read his autobiography. And isn't God wonderful? How could a white woman from Kansas have liberal parents who moved out of Texas because their daughter had an incident as a result of playing with a young black girl? And so they moved all the way from Texas to Hawaii. And there in Hawaii, perhaps the closest thing we have to an American cultural melting pot, an African from Kenya shows up. And an African from Kenya, who ironically, though he was Phi Beta Kappa at the University of Hawaii, though he went to Harvard on a scholarship even before his son did, he couldn't get a job in Kenya because he was the wrong tribe. And yet, having abandoned his son, the mother moves with the child, almost like Jesus going down into Egypt, and goes down into Indonesia and ends up in the middle of a Chinese Muslim community. My. God's hand is working. And we need to learn how to read the handwriting on the wall, as the Old Testament would put it, or the signs of the times as it's received in the book of Luke. And I'm sure there's an Islamic designation for the Spirit of God moving through history. And I'll count on my brothers getting me straight on that as soon as we get it through. But who could be more prepared to preside over an earth that right now either needs to, as Martin Luther King said, learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools? Now, this is not words anymore. This was Ike, not Ike and Tina, but Ike and Gustav. This was the plague, the frogs and the locusts hitting Wall Street and driving the stock market down. This is a cataclysm of biblical proportion that is saying to all the world, either you get your economy together and put greed behind you, become your brother's keeper, or go to hell. And America heard that message. And we, through our young people, began to say, yes, the vision of Thomas Jefferson is a real one. And so was the vision of Alexander Hamilton. Now, ironically, Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton hated each other, could not get along. Each thought the other was a spy. Hamilton was supposed to be a British spy, and Thomas Jefferson was supposed to be a French spy. And they were bitter enemies, but they were both right. One understood the importance of democracy, the other understood the importance of free enterprise. How could anybody in 1770 understand the importance of global free enterprise? Well, that's another long lecture. But it shows you very briefly that here was a man born to an unwed mother in the islands, whose mother died and left him with a younger brother. And in order to survive, he was taken in by a shopkeeper who then got sick. And so at 10 years old, he was running a store that was presiding over the shipping that was coming to the New World in the Virgin Islands. And so he had to understand and watch them count the slaves. He had to count the customs. He learned about global economics before he was 15. And he understood that America had to bring its politics and its economics together. It's taken us a long time, but that's where we are now. We have a global economy, whether we like it or not. If the Chinese decide to dump our dollars into the water, ocean, we're in trouble. Or if they decide to cash in our dollars. But by the same token, if we stop buying their goods, they collapse. We are, as Dr. King said, bound together in an inescapable network of mutuality. And one cannot make it without the other. Now that's what our politics, that's what our culture, and that's what our religions have got to recognize. But have no fear. The alliance of cultures is here, and it ain't going nowhere. And no matter how greedy and how clannish any of us get, we're not able to destroy these forces that have taken control of us. I was on Delta's board for 20 years, pleading with them to fly to Africa. And they couldn't see Africa, the whole African continent. Today they announced 8 flights to Africa. You know why? Because there are 3 million Nigerians here, and ain't none of them poor. They are the second most educated group of immigrants coming into this country, and they've been here since the 70s, and they've been making money, and they want to get back to Nigeria. So the most profitable flight on Delta's lines is the flight between Atlanta and Lagos. Remember when they used to do cartoons about Atlanta being an international city? It was an international city back then. It just took us 25 years in the Olympics to realize it. And so I want to say to you that it's wonderful being born in such challenging times. But don't fear. He's got the whole, let me put it another way. She's got the whole world in her hands.